Where do you think the others are? Sleeping? So I'm going to begin my class even though there are only two of us here, because I don't see any reason why I shouldn't. Right. So let me just start by saying hello. If you can hear me, then please let me know in the chat box, so I'll continue. And when the others wake up, they can join us. Okay. So my first question to you is, did you understand what I said in the first class? এই এখন আমি যে বিষয়গুলো পড়াচ্ছি এবং যে ধরনের কবিতা দ্য লাভ সং অফ জি অ্যালফ্রেড প্রুফ্রক, তাতে এটা বুঝতে একটু সময় লাগবে এবং এই ধরনের কবিতাটা পড়া কঠিন, ডেলিবারেটলি সেইভাবেই লেখা হচ্ছে যাতে পড়তে গেলে তোমাকে সেই এফর্টটা দিতে হয়। এইটা মনে রাখতে হবে আমাদের এলিয়েট এর যে কোনো কবিতা পড়ার সময়, এবং এই সময়কার অন্যদের কবিতা পড়ার সময়ও, যে এই কবিতাগুলো পড়তে গেলে কিন্তু একটা বিশেষ এনার্জির প্রয়োজন হয়, একটা বিশেষ ট্রেনিং এর প্রয়োজন হয় এনার্জির থেকেও বেশি, and that's something we will do well to remember. ঠিক আছে, এবার সেই একই সূত্র ধরে আমার যেটা প্রশ্ন, যে গতদিন আমি মডার্নিজম সম্পর্কে যেটা বলেছি এবং তারপরে এই কবিতাটা সম্পর্কে যেভাবে বলতে শুরু করেছি, সেটা তোমাদের কতটা বুঝতে পেরেছো সেটা হচ্ছে আমার প্রশ্ন। যেহেতু দুজন আছো, সেটা আমরা আস্তে আস্তে শুরু করি। তুমি বলো, তোমরা বলো। আমার ক্লাসটা কি আবার শুনেছো? আমি যে লিংকটা দিয়েছিলাম, কই সব? Is there anything you have to say about my last class before we move on? কেউ জয়েন না করলেও কিচ্ছু যায় আসে না, তোরা দুজন আছিস, আমি ক্লাস নেব, তোরাই শিখবি, বাকিরা নিজেরা বুঝে নেবে। আমার তো দায়িত্ব নয়। আমি যখন বলেছি তখন তো কেউ বলেনি যে এই টাইমে ক্লাস করতে অসুবিধা আছে, সেটা থাকলেও আমি চেঞ্জ করে দিই। আমি তো কখনো সেটা এইভাবে করি না। তোরা আগে বল, তোরা কি বুঝেছিস, বাকিদের কথা পরে হবে। আচ্ছা, I'll give you 5 minutes time to gather your thoughts and come back to me. ভাব কোনো প্রশ্ন আছে কিনা গতদিনের পড়া নিয়ে, তারপরে আমি বাকি ক্লাসটা নিচ্ছি। পিউরে, তোর কাছে, ওহো, তোর হাতে ফোন তো আছে, তুই ওকে নিয়ে যাচ্ছিস ঘরে? কেউ, সেটা হচ্ছে চিত্রভানুকে একটু দেবাশিস সরকার আছে না, ক্রিসবিন বিটার, ওর নাম্বারটা একটু পাঠিয়ে দিবি। ও ফোন করছে মনে হয় এই জন্য। ওকে একটু ফোন করে বল যে দাদা ক্লাস নিচ্ছে, যদি এমার্জেন্সি কিছু হয় তুই আমাকে বলে দে, আর না হলে তুই ট্যাকেল করে নে, একটু অসুবিধা হবে। হ্যাঁ, কর, ফোন কর, দেখ কি বলে। না হলেও আমি ক্লাসটা এখানে নিয়ে রাখবো, অ্যান্ড ইট উইল বি দ্যাট। কারণ আমার পক্ষে যদি অসুবিধা থাকে আগে থেকে বলতে হবে, আমি ক্লাস নিতে শুরু করার পর বলে তো লাভ নেই। Cyrene, good to see you. I hope you can hear me. Did you confuse the class time to be 10:30 because I had said it's 10 to 12? You collectively, all of you. I understand. ঠিক আছে, আমি তাহলে 10:30 অবধি দেখে শুরু করে দেবো ক্লাস। এবার যারা আছে তারাই ক্লাস করবে, কারণ উপায় নেই। Okay, hello again to everyone. I have been trying to get this class started since 10:30. I hope all of you can hear me. Even if there is only one person here, I'm going to now continue with this class and not wait for anyone else to join. Those who have joined, I sincerely thank you for joining on time. Most of you have joined on time. Those of you who are a little bit late, I can forgive, but if you have technological glitches and any problems hearing me, you can let me know in the chat box. I will be happy to help. As for what I'm teaching today, I'll be continuing with Prufrock and talking about the different aspects of the poem as we read it along. I just wanted to ask you whether you remember whatever I taught of the poem the other day. The beginning of the poem, the Italian epigraph through which it starts and where it is from. Do you remember the epigraph of Prufrock? Okay, so would you tell me, Cyrene, who are the two people who is saying it to whom? And then I'll ask someone else about the concept, about the context rather, not concept. Sorry, my bad. Guido, Count Guido di Montefeltro, saying it to whom? Guido is the speaker, I believe. So who is the addressee? Yes, Dante. The Dante of Inferno, the narrator of Inferno. And why is Guido's speech in certain ways not meant to be uttered, or in certain ways not meant to be published, and so on? What is the situation in which Guido says this to Dante? Can you remember that? Can you remember that? Okay, I'll repeat it for you. Right. Not because it's a little bit more complicated than that. Cyrene, you're almost close to the correct answer. But there's a fine detail that is missing. Guido tells this to Dante without understanding or without realizing that he is a traveler through hell who is able to return from Inferno, something that is never thought of to be possible. And so he speaks this in a confessional way, in a way that, I mean, whatever Guido tells Dante, that's before this little passage that we have as a quotation or as an epigraph here, is that is somewhat confessional and is about the things that Guido landed in hell for, the kind of sins that he had committed. However, he didn't realize that this person that he's talking to, i.e. Dante, can actually return. And so here is what the epigraph translates into English as, and I'll read it for you again. If I thought my answer were to one who ever could return to the world, this flame should shake no more. But since none ever did return alive from this depth, if what I hear be true, without fear of infamy, I answer thee. These are words spoken by Count Guido da Montefeltro in Dante's Inferno. In the eighth chasm of hell, Dante sees the fate of the evil counselors who had misused their superior wisdom to deceive others. Guido too is punished here for his treacherous advice on earth to Pope Boniface. Each sinner is imprisoned in the flame of his consciousness and tormented by its burning. When the damned speak from this flame, the voice sounds from the deep, which trembles. Dante requests Guido to reveal his identity. So may thy name on earth maintain its front. Guido does so only because he believes that Dante, too, is one of the damned who will never return to earth. And so, the idea is, how is this related to Prufrock's narrative? Let us go then, you and I. Well, it's a similar situation, or you can imagine it to be in a similar situation. And when you're reading poetry of this complexity, there will be no simple answer. But we're looking at a parallel between Guido's narrative and Prufrock's, whereby Prufrock is also saying this to someone who he believes, the reader that is who is equally damned. So Prufrock believes that he is in some sort of hell from which you, I, or anyone else who reads this poem can never come out of. A. Or maybe in the same way as Guido's little narrative to Dante, Prufrock's narrative was never meant to be disclosed, and whatever he says in the poem is not meant to be said at all, not meant to be uttered, not meant to be revealed, not meant to be narrated. Is it clear up to this point? And then I can move on with the poem. Okay. Then I will start the poem, and I will put it up on screen for you. Let us go then, you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels, and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead us to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit. Now, you have to break down the images in this poem before you can understand it. Let us go then, you and I. There are two people here, you and I. Or are there? So I have a question for you that you may not be or may not immediately be able to answer, but I expect you to be eventually able to answer. Who is you and who is I? This question you may answer later. Okay? So the two entities of this poem, the you and the I, are going out at a time when the sky is like a patient etherized upon a table, which would be twilight perhaps, evening twilight. When the evening is spread out against the sky like a patient etherized upon a table, let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust restaurants with oyster shells. Streets, and this is a description of streets, not of the mind, or maybe it is of the mind, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent. So you have two words here which you need to understand the meaning of. One, tedious. This is what tedious means. And insidious. And this is what insidious means. Forget the long list of synonyms provided here, but just look at this. Insidious, the adjective, insidious, proceeding in a gradual, subtle way but with harmful effects. Insidious, slowly becoming harmful, much like slow poisoning, if you like. And so, I mean, the words will challenge you, but this is what insidious means. Now, the second and third lines of the poem, and I read from a critical reading of the selected poems of Eliot by Manju Jain, and I will be providing you this section in a PDF in the Google Classroom after I finish teaching so that you can go back to this. The word etherized has clinical and romantic connotation. It suggests ether, which was used for anesthetics, and ethereal, which awakens romantic association. The evening in romantic poetry, as in Wordsworth's sonnet, it is a beauteous evening, calm and free. The simile of the evening as an etherized patient suggests the suspended state of Prufrock's activity. Of the first line, let us go the new and I. Ether also points forward to the image of drowning at the end of the poem. The simile is an example of Eliot's use of the conceit, the metaphysical conceit, whereby apparently divergent ideas and experiences are united to surprise the reader into a new perception of reality. Eliot discusses the idea of conceit in his essay on metaphysical poets. He takes issue with Samuel Johnson's criticism of the metaphysical poets on the ground that, within quotes, the most heterogeneous ideas are yoked by violence together. This is what Johnson said of the metaphysical poets. But in the essay, The Metaphysical Poets, and in also another essay that we will be doing, Tradition and the Individual Talent, that essay is part of our syllabi, and we will be talking about it after I am done with the poems. We will see how Eliot regenerates the position of the metaphysical poets into the English canon, right? And you will find that he is profusely influenced by the techniques of the metaphysical poets, and thereby the use of conceit and other formal innovations, or not so much formal innovations, but technical innovations that bring about a certain newness to his poetry, which he arrives at from metaphysical poetry. And most significantly and very interestingly, however, what happens is that he talks about how there was something called the dissociation of sensibility, because everything in our sensibility takes place together. But when the Romantics wrote, and before that the neoclassical poets wrote, they dissociated all sensibility and created a poetry that was artificial. And for Eliot, poetry, to be honest, to be real, has to have the association of sensibilities, has to have all that there is, which we might find strange, but they exist together in our daily lives and therefore must exist together in the way we compose poetry. So coming back to what Manju Jain has to say about Eliot, the ideas are yoked but not united. He agrees with Johnson that their attempts were always analytic, but he holds on the contrary that after the dissociation, within quotes, they put the material together again in a new unity. In a famous statement, Eliot describes his poetic process. This is, and we are quoting from Eliot here. When a poet's mind is perfectly equipped for its work, it is constantly amalgamating disparate experience. The ordinary man's experience is chaotic, irregular, fragmentary. The latter falls in love or reads Spinoza, and these two experiences have nothing to do with each other, or with with the noise of the typewriter or the smell of cooking. In the mind of the poet, these experiences are always forming new wholes. And this is what I was referring to. Oh, and you have the quote from Eliot, right? His definition of wit in the essay on Andrew Marvell illustrates Eliot's use of the conceit, within quotes, a constant inspection and criticism of experience, and after an ellipsis, a recognition implicit in the expression of every experience, of other kinds of experience which are possible. Now the question is, what is the overwhelming question that we are dealing with here? Streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. Oh, do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit. And you will see throughout the poem that Eliot will have, the narrator, not Eliot necessarily, the narrator of the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock will constantly have this this peak, this culmination that quickly comes down with an anticlimax to lead you to an overwhelming question, or do not, and then when you have the tension of the overwhelming question coming out, or do not ask, what is it? Let us go and make our visit. And that's how that works. There's a fall in the climax. The overwhelming question is neither asked and nor answered. It is averted, diverted, and that's how the poem functions. Have I made sense so far? Could you follow what we have been trying to discuss so far? If yes, then I have a few questions for you, after which we shall move on to the next section of the poem. Any responses to my class so far? Well, that overwhelming question is not ever stated. And that is the whole point, that you cannot ever reach the overwhelming question. But it could be a lot of questions. Network problem. I have something to say to all of you about network problems. সেটা হচ্ছে যে একটার বেশি সিম কিন্তু বোধহয় ব্যবহার করতে হবে এবার, যাতে একটা কোনোটায় নেটওয়ার্ক প্রবলেম হলে অন্যটা দিয়ে বুঝতে পেরেছি। বৃষ্টি হলে কিছু করার নেই। বৃষ্টি হলে কোনো নেটওয়ার্কই ঠিকঠাক কাজ করে না। বাট the overwhelming question could be anything, really, anything. It's a question of existence, it's a question of love, it's a question of proposal. এখানে মনে করা হচ্ছে যে someone is trying to propose to someone, but that's not happening, and there are other interpretations, সেগুলোতে আমি পরে আসছি. But is there anything else that you don't understand? This question is not going to be answered so easily, or not answered at this stage. Anything else that you want to ask me? Okay, so we are then going to go along the poem. Uh, in the room, the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. What does this mean? It's a different stanza and it stands out. So, uh, an overwhelming question before we come to Michelangelo. The overwhelming question remains unstated and undeterminate. Pay attention. Although it has been interpreted as Prufrock's intended proposal to the lady he is about to visit. I think I told you that already. And as a question concerning the meaning of Prufrock's life, social and existential. It is possible that the question is an ironic allusion to the medieval Grail legend, in which the questioning knight can restore the wasteland and heal its impotent and ailing ruler by asking the right question. In some versions the legend, the right question is, "What ails thee, king?" Is everyone having hearing problems, or is it just Shobnaj Akhtar that is having that? You're not having, so you can hear me. Then ask her to wait for the recorded class to become available. I don't see any other way of moving forward. I'll just type it out for her. Everyone else can hear me, so it's a problem at your end and not mine, and I can't really do anything about it. Sorry about this. So in the Grail legend, the right question is, "What ails thee, king?" Eliot would have been familiar with the literature of medieval romance through his reading of Morte d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory, the first prose account in English of King Arthur and his knights of the Round Table in their quest for the Holy Grail. This was one of Eliot's favorite books when he was a child, and Malory remained one of Eliot's favorite authors. So that's how this works. I mean, what ails thee? Another thing to notice would be that there's constant sort of pressure. I mean, on the figure of Prufrock, who is the narrator of this poem. Constant pressure to be something, to be someone, to to become something which he constantly fails to do. And so again, the overwhelming question, what ails thee? If we imagine that that is the question, then there is no answer to it. And he is not really a king. And we'll see that. I mean, later on he'll go on to say, I'm not Prince Hamlet, wasn't meant to be. And we will come to the significance of that line, and we will also talk about Prufrock's inability to become, his inability to be, his inability to achieve something, and what that might be. Okay? How does the lines then how do you read these lines? Do you know who Michelangelo was? Or Michelangelo, as we call him in English. So let us see some of Michelangelo's works, and then we can come back to whatever we are discussing about Michelangelo, right? This is Michelangelo. Can you see the picture on your screen? This is a self-portrait of Michelangelo. Is it? Is it a self-portrait? No, it's his follower. Michelangelo is called Michelangelo Buonarroti, but you will do well to remember that in those days they were known by their first names and not by their last names. So Michelangelo is his name. Like Raphael is the name of Raphael, right? So this is how Michelangelo looked like. This is what Michelangelo looked like. This is his signature. This is the sculpture of Madonna of the Stairs, which is his earliest known marble work. This is his most incredible work, the Pieta, which is, you know what the Pieta is? Pieta is Mother Mary holding the dead body of Christ. That's called Pieta, right? And this is what Pieta is. This is, of course, David. And this is the Sistine Chapel, St. Peter's Basilica. This is Moses. This is the Last Judgment. And this is the dome of the St. Peter's Basilica. Okay? So, we are now familiar with some of the works of Michelangelo and also how and what, I mean, or what he looked like, and how and what he made as a sculptor and drew or painted as a painter. And I mean, you see his technical brilliance. He came after Leonardo da Vinci and contradicted da Vinci in some ways, but also followed him in some others. But that's a discussion for another day. I have to ask you, do you see an abruptness in the poem when we switch from let us go and make our visit and then suddenly there's some room, in the room women come and go talking of Michelangelo? What is this room? It could be an actual room, a physical room, but it could also be the mind of Prufrock. And you must remember that there is a collapsing of the boundaries of the inner and the outer world. Throughout this narrative, we are unsure as to which parts are being spoken about the outer world and which parts are being spoken about the inner world, or about certain situations in Prufrock's mind. Are we clear? And here is a small note on Michelangelo that you should keep. Okay? In the chat box, you find a little bio note of Michelangelo that you might need to understand the reference fully. But you should also remember that in the room may not be a physical room, but it also might be just Prufrock's mind. Just take your minds to the way we think, the way we do. I mean, our thoughts are not streamlined, right? We think like that. AJ, let us go, then you and I. Do not ask what is it, let us go and make our visit. এটা বলার পরই মনটা অন্য জায়গায় চলে যায়. And there is something very stream of consciousness about the way this particular poem is narrated. And I think we would do well to remember that. Right? So this is what we gather. A sudden break. In that room, women come and go talking of Michelangelo. And of course, Michelangelo, as I've already pointed out, lived from 1475 to 1564. This couplet, in the room, women come and go talking of Michelangelo. The couplet epitomizes the social setting and ethos of the poem. This is what Monju Jain says about the lines. Prufrock's inability to articulate his feelings is in contrast to the linguistic self-assurance of the women who can effortlessly converse with Michelangelo and find the formulated phrase with which to categorize Prufrock. And also here, there is a question of women who don't really, they don't probably have the know-how to talk about Michelangelo, but they're talking of Michelangelo is skin deep to kind of prove that they have some sort of intellectual bearing. Why does Prufrock refer to Michelangelo? Well, Prufrock refers to the women who refer to Michelangelo. It's a second-hand reference. You mean he Eliot or he Prufrock? Which he are you talking about, Silene? He Eliot or he Prufrock? Yes, they only show off their knowledge. Exactly. But the S here will be missing. They only show off their knowledge. Yes. Most likely. No, you don't have to be sorry, but just remember it when you're writing in an exam. I don't mind, because you're interacting here, and that's wonderful. So I'm very, very happy that we're having this class here today and doing so over such a long time when we can actually discuss everything of the poem. So, as I've been saying, then again he comes to the next section of the poem, when we get some of the urban imagery again. And this is classic modernism, urbanity, colorlessness, alienation. This is what we constantly get in modernism, right? So these lines are: the yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. Now, what is the fog being compared to? Which animal? Tell me. Animal, not street. Flicked its tongue, curled about, and fell asleep. What animal? Read the lines carefully again and tell me what animal imagery do we get. Rubs its back, licks its tongue, lingers upon the pool, stands in drains, slips by the terrace, makes a sudden leap, and seeing a soft October night curls once about the house and falls asleep. I'm paraphrasing, but what animal can do that? Good. That's exactly what it is. You would have won yourself a prize had we not been so far from each other due to the pandemic. But anyway, you'll have to wait for the pandemic to be over to collect your box of chocolates or whatever you're going to get for this. Okay, so the next question is, do you see the break in the narrative with the Michelangelo's couplets? I mean, it was going in one direction, then suddenly in that room, women come and go talking of Michelangelo, and then suddenly we're back to the urban imagery. So there is constant movement between the inner and the outer worlds, the mind and the physical world, as it were. And you would need to remember that when you read this poem. And what is being said internally and what is actually being done, what's actually happening externally is difficult to say, because the yellow fog that rubs its back on the window panes is an urban imagery, but it also can talk about the state of mind Prufrock is in, where everything is yellow, colorless, right? The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pool that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curls once about the house and fell asleep. And here's what Eliot says and Manju Jain says, and you'll also have to remember the great French poet, probably the father of poetic modernism, Charles Baudelaire, who is an influence on everyone who write at this time, including T.S.Eliot. And so I will read again from Manju Jain. The source of Eliot's urban imagery are autobiographical and literary. The fog here is the fog of St. Louis, which blew from the factory chimneys across Mississippi. This is Eliot talking about I mean, this is also Eliot who talked about this in a letter to Patricia Hutchins. Okay, don't need to go into so much details of where we find this information. Eliot wrote that his urban imagery was that of St. Louis, upon which that of Paris and London have been superimposed. For his exposition of the mind in the city, Eliot acknowledged his debt to Charles Baudelaire, something that I've already pointed out. And of course, Baudelaire's most significant book, and the book that apparently sets modernism on its tracks, is called Les Fleurs du Mal, which translates into English as the flowers of evil. Right, and remember that I was referring to someone called Abu Sayyed Ayub in the first class about his book Adhunikata or Rabindranath, where he discusses the idea of modernism, and there he talks about this sense of evil pervading through the text generated by modernism. Right, and so this is something we'll all have to remember, how Baudelaire is a major influence and how a sense of evil pervades through all of modernism or modernist works of literature, if you like. And once we are done with this, we can probably discuss the complexity of such an idea and how this works. Here's what Eliot says on his indebtedness to Charles Baudelaire. I think that from Baudelaire I learned first a precedent of the poetical possibilities never developed by any poet writing in my own language, or more sordid aspects of the modern metropolis, of the possibility of fusion between the sordidity, the sordidly realistic and the phantasmagoric, the possibility of the juxtaposition of the matter of fact and the fantastic. From him, as from Lefort, I learned that the sort of material that I had, the sort of experience that an adolescent had in an industrial city in America, could be the material for poetry, and that the source of new poetry might be found in what had been regarded hitherto as the impossible, the sterile, the intraceably unpoetic. This is what Eliot says to criticize the critic. This is the book of Eliot's from which we find this particular reference. Okay. The example of Baudelaire was important to Eliot not merely, within quotes, the use of the sordid life of the great metropolis, unquote, but more significantly in, quote, the elevation of such imagery to the first intensity, presenting it as it is, and yet making it present something much more than itself, unquote. This is again from Eliot's selected essay, and this is from his essays on Baudelaire. The earlier one was from another essay, right? In his description of the fog, Eliot may have had in mind Baudelaire's Les Sept Villars, the seven old men, O swarming city, city full of dreams, where the ghost accosts a passerby in broad daylight. One morning, when a background compared to an actor's soul, a dirty yellow fog was flooding the whole of space, I was making my way, unquote. The description of the fog in terms of the cat is another example of Eliot's use of the conceit to express Prufrock's mental state. Prufrock contemplates action through the movements of the cat and the fog, but the contemplation ends in inertia and somnolence. The effect here is attained, as in Eliot's discussion of metaphysical poets, not by the mere explication of the contents of a comparison, but through a development of the comparison by rapid association of thoughts which require considerable agility on the part of the reader. And so I come back to a point that I had been making earlier, is that this kind of poetry is going to challenge the reader. So আমি যে কথাটা এখনই বললাম সেটা আমি আরেকটু ব্যাখ্যা করে বুঝিয়ে দেবার চেষ্টা করছি যে শার্ল বোদলেয়ার Les Fleurs du Mal বা The Flowers of Evil এর লেখক, one of the forefathers of modernism and one of the absolute giants of this kind of urban poetry, and probably one of the most influential poets in any language of all time, is a big influence on Eliot. এবং তিনি এই কথাটা বলছেন যে আমি সেন্ট লুইস মিসৌরিতে একটা ইন্ডাস্ট্রিয়াল টাউনে আমি বড় হচ্ছি, যেটাকে আমি যখন ইনসিডেন্টলি আজকে টি.এস. এলিয়টের জন্মদিন 26শে সেপ্টেম্বর 1888 সালে টি.এস. এলিয়ট জন্মগ্রহণ করছেন এবং ওখানে বড় হচ্ছেন মিসৌরিতে, ইন দ্য টাউন সেন্ট লুইস মিসৌরি, রাইট? সেন্ট লুইসে যখন বড় হচ্ছেন সেটা ইন্ডাস্ট্রিয়াল টাউন, যেখানে চিমনি, ধোঁয়া, এইসব, এবং মনে করা হয় যে এগুলো থেকে কোনো কবিতা হওয়া সম্ভব নয়। Charles Baudelaire is one of the first people to make poetry out of this urban, unromantic, smoky, foggy, industrial reality. এবং সেই কারণে he becomes so very important to Eliot and to the likes of Eliot who are part of this. বোঝাতে পারলাম? এই অবধি কি স্পষ্ট? Have you followed me so far? Of course. উচ্চারণটা হচ্ছে শার্ল বোদলেয়ার। এই যে Les Fleurs du Mal, এবং এগুলো বদলেয়ারের হাতে কাটাকুটি নোট নানা রকম নিয়ে লিখছেন, কিন্তু this is the first edition of it. এটা বদলেয়ারের কবর, বদলেয়ারের ছবি, এটা বদলেয়ারের বই। এই যে নামটাতেই কিছুটা বুঝতে পারবি কিরকম what Charles Baudelaire is like, because we associate flowers with love, with this, with that, things beautiful. But for Baudelaire, flowers are evil. Les Fleurs du Mal, the flowers of evil. Right? Interesting. Think about it. Think about what it could mean. Yeah? this is basically an introduction on what the flowers of evil come to mean. There's a good English translation of the Fleur de Mal available online. And I'm sharing the link with you. You can read some of the poems of Baudelaire, and I'm sure you'll find it interesting. Do you want to read it? Then here's the link for you. Let me just find it, okay? This is a wonderful website through which you can read the Fleur de Mal. Original ফরাসি কবিতাটাও আছে, তার পাশে ইংরেজি কবিতাগুলো আছে। ফরাসি তো আমরা জানি না, so we can read the English poems, and this could be a very interesting project for you. When you're reading Eliot, first read Baudelaire, and you will find the parallels. And I'm so happy that you want to read it. Thank you. Read it. I'll also read it, and in our next class we'll be discussing what Fleur de Mal brings to the plate, and how that kind of poetry is a precursor to the kind of poetry that Eliot produces in Prufrock, in his early poems like Four Quartets and all the other poems that we have been talking about. Poems like, for example, let me find it. Portrait of a Lady and others that he writes early on, right? Preludes. Yeah, that's the name I was trying to think. Preludes. So preludes, Prufrock, এই ধরনের যে কবিতা, সেগুলো কিভাবে আমাদের বোদলেয়ারের দ্বারা ইনফ্লুয়েন্সড হচ্ছে সেটা কিন্তু আমরা দেখতে পাবো, and that kind of reading will give us some sort of enhanced idea of the kind of poetry that Eliot and the others are writing at that time. ঠিক আছে? এবং after I finish teaching, I'm going to give you a quiz and other things on Google Classroom activities that will also help you better understand the poem and formulate a good answer. ঠিক আছে? So we are going to, মানে আমাদের physically class হচ্ছে না সেটা যেরকম অসুবিধাজনক, সেরকম we are having this wonderful opportunity to make good use of technology, and we are doing that here. And I think that will take us to various different places in terms of learning, and I think that it will be great. Achha, one request to you is to take a screenshot of the attendance and send it to the group, okay? As a record of this class. Are we going to continue further today, or do you think we should stop now? Okay. Yeah, I think it was a very, very loaded class, and we can stop now. And I will give you a revision of whatever we have done until now, and then take it on in the next class. Tomorrow is a holiday. Sunday is off for everyone. I will try taking another long class on Monday and reach further into the poem. Okay? Thank you, all of you, for coming here and doing this class. And if you have any questions, queries, you can always come back to me. But read up Baudelaire and other things that I have provided you. I will also provide you with something. uh, I'll give you a PowerPoint presentation or something. Actually, I'm not on my laptop, which is, well, আমার ল্যাপটপের চার্জার খারাপ হয়ে গেছে, সো অল মাই টিচিং মেটেরিয়াল ইজ অন দ্য ল্যাপটপ, সো আই এম টিচিং ফ্রম অ্যানাদার কম্পিউটার, সেই জন্য আমার একটু অসুবিধা হচ্ছে টু প্রোভাইড ইউ থিংস, বাট আই উইল প্রোভাইড ইউ থিংস as and when I can. Once I get my laptop back, you'll get everything. Acha, what about your exams? I have no idea what your exams may be like. Okay, but we'll keep on learning and hope that your exams will be, এবার থার্ড ইয়ারে যেরকম ভাবে এক্সাম হচ্ছে সেইভাবে হতে পারে, অনলাইন কোয়েশ্চেন পেপার ডাউনলোড হবে, বাড়িতে লিখবে, ছবি তুলবে, and we'll upload it to the website which will be examined. এটা একটা হতে পারে, ঠিক আছে? So I am going to teach you in a way that you are going to have exams. আগেকার যা বাকি আছে, যদি তোমাদের এক্সামের ডেট দেয় তখন আমরা স্যাট রিভাইজ করে দেবো একদম পরীক্ষার আগে, একটা একদম ফোকাসড ক্লাস নিয়ে যেগুলো যেগুলো আবার পড়ানো দরকার সেগুলো পড়িয়ে দেবো ফ্রম দ্য ফোর্থ সেম। চলেগা? ঠিক আছে, আর কোনো যদি প্রশ্ন থাকে আজকে কারোর, তাহলে সেগুলো এখন করে নাও, তারপরে আই এম গোইং টু টার্মিনেট দ্য ক্লাস। Do you have any other questions? চাইল্ড হেলথ পিলগ্রিমেজ এই বছর আছে না গত বছর ছিল? মানে লাস্ট সেমে ছিল তো? হ্যাঁ, আমি পড়িয়ে দেবো পরীক্ষার আগে, অবশ্যই পড়িয়ে দেবো, পরীক্ষার আগে পড়িয়ে দেবো, ঠিক আছে? এর মধ্যেও পড়িয়ে দিতে পারি। ইউ ওয়ান্ট টু ডু ইট নাও অর লেটার? পরীক্ষার ডেট দিক না, তারপর পড়িয়ে দেবো, চিন্তা করতে হবে না। হ্যাঁ, লেটার। এখন যেটা যেভাবে হচ্ছে হোক, যখন পরীক্ষার ডেট দেবে তার আগে আমি ঠিক তৈরি করে দেবো। ইটস মাই রেসপন্সিবিলিটি। তোরা আমাকে একবার মনে করাবি শুধু পরীক্ষার আগে, স্যার আপনি এটা পড়াবেন, আমি পড়িয়ে দেবো। আরো কিছু কিছু আছে যেগুলো আমার আর একটু ভালো করে পড়ানো দরকার, হ্যাঁ পড়িয়ে দেবো। তখন তো দুম করে বন্ধ হয়ে গেল, আমিও ব্যস্ত ছিলাম উইথ দ্য বেবি অ্যান্ড অল, সেই জন্য আমিও কলকাতায় ছিলাম, আমার কাছে না কম্পিউটার ছিল না কিছু ছিল না, ইন্টারনেট কানেকশন ছিল, ফলে আমি ওই সময়টা সেইভাবে ক্লাস নিতে পারি। But now I'm home and everything is fine, so things will fall into place. তাহলে এই কথাই রইলো। So I'm terminating the class. আর কিছু বলার নেই তো কারোর? এক সেকেন্ড ধর, ধরে থাক, ছাড়িস না। Okay, then goodbye. My next class will be on Monday, and I'll give the link in the morning, but it will also be another 2-hour class. Okay, and do read up whatever I've provided you already. So see you on Monday. Bye bye. বল, ক্লাস শেষ হলো? হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ, ও ভালো, শোন, অনলাইন ক্লাস অফলাইন ক্লাসের থেকে ভালো হচ্ছে। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ প্যাচ করছি। শোন, আমি যেটা করি, আমি ইউটিউবে লাইভ স্ট্রিম করে দিচ্ছি। এবার যেহেতু লাইভ স্ট্রিম করছি, বেটারা দেখছি ক্লাস করছে না, এবার আমি স্ট্রিমটা হাইড করে দেবো। আজকের ক্লাসটা আমি ওদের 2 দিন পরে আবার অন করব। হ্যাঁ, আমিও বজ্জাত কম না তো। হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ হ্যাঁ। তো